Hey, everybody doing? Well, it's now Friday and it's our second lecture. And I hope you guys are finishing up. This is our first assignment that's already due today. So anyway, this is going to obviously go into some very basic stuff about what's going on with, how to basically, this lecture will go into basically the very basics of how to write a news story. Okay. And there's some reading involved with that, chapters 3, 4, 9, 11. Um, so that will basically help supplement what I talk about in terms of news writing, okay, and how it's structured. As I've mentioned before, it's very much an upside down story. And actually, I'm just going to start off by, before I even get to the book, just kind of show you a little bit how it's done, okay? So let's share the screen a little bit right now, okay? It's a white thing that's going around here. I don't know, I'm not sure if that's like a new Zoom thing or not. But anyway, um, so a news story. So you guys are probably, like I said, used to writing things that basically has like a thesis or a topic statement. Okay. Body and conclusion. Okay. Well, news story is actually something more along the lines of this. And actually, one of your chapters you're to read is chapter 9. So I'm going to jump to chapter 9 because chapter 9 is what has what is called the inverted pyramid. Um, it's called the chapter is called the body of the news story. Um, sorry, just get this to the next page. There we go. Okay. All right. There we go. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, this is it's a little bit blackened out. Maybe it's better if I just do it like this, but let's see. Okay. Do this. Nope. Okay. Maybe no, can't do it smaller. Anyway, all right, if you can really like see it as well as you can, oop, there it goes. Um, you can see right here that actually there's a fat part to the top of the triangle when it's upside down triangle. And what this basically implies is that a news story, as I demonstrated slightly earlier in a week, is essentially a very top-down science, okay, writing one. The very fat part of the triangle, as you can see there at the top, which is the lead, summarizes the story. That's where essentially everything starts is with the lead, okay? That's where everything gets summarized. That's where the main point of the story is made. That's where the story basically says why is that this is a unique thing that's we're talking about here. We're going to identify it, and it basically more than anything answers this question: what is this story about? Okay. What it does here actually, it actually kind of follows the very basic story, as you can see here, of it's an unfortunate story, but it's like essentially what would be an automobile or traffic accident. So it was, I'm sorry, let me just actually go back to, I was trying to use it this way. Um, okay, let me go back. Okay, just let me go back a little bit more. Okay, let me close that. Okay. All right, so let's just do it this way. So anyway, see, because as you can see here, it summarizes the story. So it summarized what the actual thing would happen with a traffic accident. Now, as opposed to actually like going in the process of actually, like I said, just kind of stating some sort of hypothesis statement, and then going into the body with some explanation, then concluding it. What you're essentially doing is you're actually using your conclusion at the top of the story. It's almost like you're moving the conclusion from the bottom to the top. You're making the conclusion to whatever thing that's happening or needs to be solved at the top. So there are no actual conclusions in the news story. They actually just kind of dwindle out. If you follow like the progress of the upside down triangle or pyramid, you can see it just becomes smaller, 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 smaller. Well, that's essentially what a news story is. It becomes smaller importance, smaller in importance, smaller in importance to the end where it's basically the least important thing. Okay. And that's why the bottom of the triangle is narrow and pointy. Okay. So you basically have your lead, summarize what the story is about. Then you identify essentially, like, then you go into like essentially what would be like maybe the most important thing to report about, the second most important thing to report about in terms of a car accident, which could be essentially debatable, but usually I like to think that maybe the first thing is people want to know about is not necessarily, I know it'd be the practical thing to learn about, but I would think the kind of inhuman thing to worry about would be to worry about like essentially it's like how's this going to hold me up in traffic? And that is obviously very important, but I think the first thing people always want to do is they want to find out if people were hurt, especially if it's like a young child, like somebody who's extremely vulnerable, that sort of thing. So that's always the first thing. That's why people slow down in traffic and look, I believe. There's other people there who are just probably sick and want to see something gory and whatever. But I think people really actually do care for other people. And that's one of the first things they want to know. We're a justice society, so the next thing we want to know is like how this happened. And if it's caused by somebody else, we want to know, especially if it's like somebody like a drunk driver or something. That's actually like speaks to the safety of our residents, our community, that the people are driving around in a reckless manner. These two things also could also, identifying the injured and also explaining how the accident occurred could also go to, maybe somebody knows somebody who is actually like involved in this accident, especially if it's a local story or something like that. So they want to know like that person essentially is they might even know the person, may have graduated high school with that person. You file the charges with the driver. That's usually something that's probably always kind of tied in how the accident has occurred. Maybe you get some witnesses, that sort of thing, and then like maybe some damage. But then you get into essentially like which comes in later humanistically is like how this might affect. If nobody gets injured or anything like that, that this will probably like move way to the top, way to the second thing, okay? But if somebody's injured, people want to know about that first, I would say, okay? I know it's a judgment call, but and then everybody, of course, is worried about they're driving to get into Rutgers on time at class and whatever, or get to work or whatever. But people want to know if somebody's hurt, okay? And then basically like maybe some more minor details at the bottom. So that's essentially how a news story is designed, okay? Um, so what you do, and then that can apply to not just a car accident, but it's like your profile story, okay? So if I was doing a story about Tom Davis. What's so interesting about me? Well, Tom Davis is, you want to, sometimes it's good maybe when you're taking notes, but maybe just like kind of list the different facts and items that you learn. So Tom Davis is a journalist and part-time professor who has written, this is probably the most unique thing about me, much about mental health. Okay. So that might not be the most exciting lead there ever was, but what it does is essentially identifies what's unique about me. Okay. I have actually written a book about mental health. I wrote about mental health in my family. So this is what makes separates me from like every other journalist. So it's this story were just me about being, I'm sorry, is a journalist. Sorry about that. Jeez, hey, I'm not perfect. Um, um, I mean, there are tons of journalists that still out there. Despite what we heard. And what makes essentially us what makes essentially like I'm sorry, you might have had to see that. I don't know who's like tweeting me right now, but um anyway, okay, anyway, whatever. Um so anyway, basically the whole idea here is that, you want to like basically separate what's unique and makes me different from everybody else, okay? Then you go maybe to the next important thing, which is like, and that's when you get into the whole thing of who, what, where, why, when. You have to decide like which one of those questions really needs to be answered first. It's probably the what. What have I done? Okay. So then you go through the process in declining order of what's important. So maybe like, okay, so Davis has written a book. called A Legacy of Madness and had a long time column called Coping. Okay. Um, you see, you write about maybe you try to explain a little bit more about like, okay, what put me in that position. What happens is when you make the broad summarization in the lead, you want to break down things into smaller details that back up the lead. Okay. Um, Davis, has a history of mental illness. Really getting on the couch now, aren't I? And his family involving his mother, grandfather, and others. Okay. All right. So then you go into more detail. The detail gets maybe a little more granular, that sort of thing. Um, and then it proceeds from there. You notice, and that's why when somebody had a question already about essentially like in my rubric, what do I actually really expect in a news story? As you can see, I'm writing paragraphs that are really like no more than a sentence. And what I'm expecting people to do essentially is to um, write paragraphs that essentially like break after a sentence or two. This is known as the lead, which can be spelled either this way or this way. I'm going to be spelling it more this way. Okay, that's the first sentence of the story that identifies what's the story about. But these paragraphs after that usually are no more than two sentences, okay? Um, also maybe like Davis has worked. This is like less important because doesn't deal with mental illness, but it deals with more of my work history. Has worked for Patch, the Bergen Record, blah blah blah. But you can see this is actually kind of written in a way that's almost like written conversationally, okay? But when you're talking to somebody about somebody and what they do, you normally take natural breaks in your explanations in your talk, okay? So that's why these paragraphs are shorter because it's almost like taking a breath between each thought and point, okay? All right. This is very much active voice. Davis has. Davis has. It's noun verb. Tom Davis is. Okay. It's not written like Yoda. A journalist and part-time professor Tom Davis is. That would be passive voice. One who has. That's very slow and ugly writing. Okay. It's more like kind of fast-paced. Kind of get to the point, which is the way people talk. I talk this way. I talk in active voice. I teach. I am a journalist. That's very much active voice where the noun comes before the verb. Okay. All right. So now I give you a little bit of introduction to like essentially like what writing is. Let's talk about the assignments that are becoming to you. And actually, I am actually taping this Thursday night. So when I say today, I'm actually meaning Friday. Okay. These will be lit up tomorrow. You can see, this is what's due today. That's our profile of somebody you know. Okay, please don't use AI. Okay, and I had my example of a story that worked there right there. But this is what's going to pop up along with this new lecture that I'm going to be posting. It's going to be the rewrite for the first story, which will be due in a week. Okay, as I mentioned before, you have a rewrite option, and for those of you who got R's, it's not an option. But if you get a C or above, not an A, but if you get a C or above, you get the option to rewrite for a higher grade. Okay, and what you do is you submit to this assignment entry, not the first one. I've had people make that mistake where they've submitted it to the very first assignment entry. You have to submit it to this one. Okay, so this will be posted. Once you submit to this first entry right here, your assignment on somebody you know, and then I'm going to grade it hopefully by the end of the weekend. Hopefully. I do have some things going on, but we'll see. Okay. Then what you do is I send it back to you with the grade, whether it's A through C or an R. If it's an R, you have to rewrite it and you submit to this. Okay. If you don't rewrite it, you get an F. Okay. If you have a C or above, excluding an A, of course, because you can't get a higher grade than an A, you can rewrite for a higher grade. You can't rewrite for a lower grade, by the way. If you rewrite, the worst that can happen is your grade stays the same. Okay. That's happened rarely where people have written a story where it's actually been worse, or actually it's been just really not much of an improvement. What I usually do is I kind of see that as like maybe there's something that I did that would, didn't kind of quite translate. So I might even go back to you and say like try again or something. So um I have done that in the past. Okay. So yes, but here's I'll get to our new assignment first, which is our next graded assignment. But the other thing I want to do, and I'm going to talk more about this in the Monday's lecture. Okay, but um, what I typically do, and look at this third assignment already. Oh my God, look at this. We haven't barely even started yet already. What I do is, I mean, the very much new being a journalist is very much about thinking and being on your own. Being a self-starter, being your own boss. I mean, what I've heard like throughout my career is like editors. I mean, I know now a lot of us work remote, so it's like it's kind of silly to even say this, but um, I remember I did a tour of the New York Times building one time, and this could really apply to any newsroom I've been in, but it was pretty empty inside, and this is before the internet. Okay, I mean, this actually it was after the internet started, but it was 20 years ago, but it was before it really took over. But anyway, the editor of the New York Times that was there said that they really liked the newsroom being empty, and you maybe can guess what that would be. Think about it for a second. Okay, here's the answer. They liked the empty newsroom because that meant everybody was out on assignment. That they were not just kind of hanging out in the newsroom talking to each other, going to the snack machine or whatever. Okay. They actually, were out doing their job. That's like one of the first things I did when I went to the Bergen Record was actually I went out to the city of Hackensack, New Jersey, and just talked to people, and it was amazing how like people were like kind of stunned by that. And there were people in the newsroom who were also, I have to say, racist, who would never talk to black people. Could you believe that? This is like 2001. It's just really despicable. But so anyway, yes, they actually said this. Despicable people. Anyway, um, so that's what you do is you go out and you find your own assignments. So there's a term that's actually used often. It's called self-managers, and editors expect their reporters to be self-managers, people who can think of their own, come up with their own ideas. So what I'm going to ask you to do, and this is actually an extra credit opportunity, is to actually come up with an idea. Okay, I'm asking you for 5 story ideas that are Rutgers related, and it's due actually a little less than a week from today, Thursday, June 4th. Okay. And I will choose the best idea, and it might overlap with other people. So that person or people, if you have the same idea as that person that I pick as the next idea, will actually get extra credit in our assignment, which usually gets factored at the end of the semester. I give a half a grade higher to any particular assignment. Okay. I know the last couple assignments count more. I'm talking about the assignments that really just count the 10% of your writing grade, the count once. Okay. So anyway, so that's somebody who's actually like writing to me on Twitter. I'm not sure why. Anyway, um, so anyway, that's I'm gonna talk more about that on Monday because I'd really like to try to really concentrate on like what's due next. Okay. So what I do is so you're gonna see all this new stuff pop up. Um, and this is the next actual graded assignment. Okay. Now, look, I've actually looked. Some of you actually have sent me your assignments. It's actually a good thing because you know, I consider that almost like the part of the class participation. If you're actually participating, actually like getting involved and showing me your work before you submit it, that's great. I mean, you can do that. I might not edit it entirely, but I'll give you some guidance perhaps. I have some people do that already. So yeah, and that's great. And I don't mean I hope this is not like a negative put down or anything like that, but I just want to let you know that I've kind of seen some things already. So I got my first taste and we've got to work on some fundamentals, okay? Some of which I've already talked about. Um, but some of them also identify with some of the rules of the class. Okay. So this is all part of the second assignment, which I'll get to. And what I like to do is I like to start first with a macro assignment, one that actually kind of deals with a larger issue like a profile of a person. And then on my second assignment, I like to kind of laser in on one part of the assignment that one part of the one part of a story that really matters, and that's the lead. Okay. But first, let me just like remind some people. Some people have like sent me set like PDFs. Okay. I can't grade on a PDF. I grade on a Microsoft Word doc. So please use Microsoft Word doc. If you don't feel like you have access to it, then please find access to it. I mean, it's available at libraries, whatever. Okay. Maybe you're somewhere around Rutgers even. Okay. Just please use it. Get it to me. If you're failing that, then I would suggest you use Google Docs or you even just send it to me as an email, the body of the email. Okay. Um, this is not a creative writing class, so please avoid using the glorious adjectives, that sort of thing. Just really stick straight to the facts, as I demonstrated earlier when I was writing that story about myself. I didn't like say I was glorious or, I was bespeckled or anything like that. I said that basically I'm Tom Davis, a journalist. I'm actually bespeckled would be a fine adjective to use because I do wear glasses and it's accurate. But, if I, if I said if you wrote that I had gray hair, that's factual. If you wrote that I had very lovely gray hair, that would be crap. So don't write that, okay? And it's false anyway. It's funny actually. I should really be updating this actually. It says paragraph should be no more than. Let me just update this. I'm sorry about this. Two sentences. Um, okay, that's a very tragic story about a hockey player. Anyway, except for the lead, which is one sentence, okay? All right. Boy, some things I just missed. Okay. So anyway, full name on first reference. These just when you read the Associated Press style book, you will see that. You'll see that I wrote that when I was writing the story about myself. It's full name, Tom Davis on first reference. And every reference after that, it's actually viewed as an objective way of actually describing people because if you describe people by their first name, it's actually kind of like a viewed as like a way of like palling with somebody. And also first names are less common, sorry, are more common than last names. So it's a more unique way of identifying people, and that's by their last name. Okay. One tip I would say, like if you're trying to really like get a story that makes sense, is I would say a linear path. And I have actually I have a you might those of you might I don't know if you've met Steve Miller yet. Steve Miller has a thing that he calls um the uh the string theory, and that's making sure that everything is on a linear path. Everything that comes up in a news story is like on one straight path. You don't veer off it, you stay on the one single solitary sliver of a topic that's important and unique. He likes to call that the string theory. Yeah, that's two actually. So I was trying to get one. Okay, so let me try to do the one. Okay, look at the one string. That's supposed to stay your lead to your bottom. Okay. Reason why I'm keeping it like this is because this is what happens when you don't stay on the straight line. See, this happens a lot to your Apple stuff, right? It gets all tangled up and it takes forever to untangle. If you go in all different directions, you basically have a very tangled up situation, okay? And you can't follow it and you can't unravel it and you can't figure out what the hell the story is about, okay? So please try to stay on that linear path that I showed you before, okay? Yeah, once you find that unique piece of information, stick with it and stay to the bottom of the story. Primary details, secondary details, move onward, okay? Okay, so I do have an assignment, and it's actually this. It's you click on it and it comes up, and what it is, it's like an old workbook assignment, okay? And what I'm going to ask you guys to do is not write an actual story, but write 7 individual leads. That means 7 first paragraphs to a story, okay? Just the first paragraph. Everybody got that? Just the first paragraph to a story. And what they do is, I'm going to show you right now. This is where you're going to call up. Summary lead, it's the same thing. And then they call this next section, it's the same thing, impact leads. All leads have summarize, all leads have impact, okay? Just basically write a lead, a one sentence lead. Just one sentence, okay? One sentence. This is not an essay test, okay? I went to school too at Rutgers. I know what I call it circling the drain. When you have an essay test, and people write these really long answers, hoping that somewhere it'll land on the right answer. There's no padding here, okay? You write one sentence and that's it for these leads. It's supposed to be the first sentence to a story. Everybody got that? So these leads summarize the main point of the story, place emphasis on what's unique, essentially that sort of thing. So what you have here, they amount to 12. There's a first section here with 7, and then there's a next one with 5, okay? What you're going to do is you're going to take a Microsoft Word, okay, doc, and you're going to write on that Microsoft Word doc a lead out of this collection of information here. And the same thing for number 2, this collection of information here. And the same thing for number 3, and so on and so forth, okay? And what they do is they give you essentially information that might be written like during an interview or maybe like collected during a press conference or something like that. It's essentially like notes for a story. And what you're going to do is you're just going to write one sentence out of it, okay? I mean, some things I have to keep re-emphasizing. I've insisted that people write just one sentence to a story, one sentence lead, and they'll write five, okay? So anyway, this one right here, I'm going to give away a little bit of a hint. Okay, a survey was released yesterday by the Child Abuse Center in Baltimore. Survey said that 3 to 4 children die every day in the United States from child abuse or neglect. It's horrible. Statistics in the survey show that number of child abuse cases rose at the end of the year from 2.7 million from 2.5 the previous year. Okay, so there's new pieces of information here. And what you have to decide here really is like it's almost it comes down to like really a sentence that's within this collection of information here. Okay? You have to decide, like I would say, to choose between two sentences and what would make this story unique and new, okay? Because you're learning this for the first time, that 3 to 4 children die every day in the United States from abuse or neglect, okay? Then you're also learning this for the first time that the survey, the number of child abuse or neglect cases rose from 2.5 or 2.7. So what you have to do is, and I'm actually take a little test this here to make sure that you're actually listening. I would write about this 3 to 4 children dying every day because actually that's actually like a more horrifying, unique element to this story that's horrible that people can really picture and view. But I think this thing with rising from 2.5 to 2.7 almost diminishes the impact of what's horrifying here. Okay. This is the more unique element of the story, I would say. So this should be the lead, and this should be all you write out of this first problem. Okay. That's it. The survey we released, whatever day, yesterday, says 3 to 4 children die every day. Then you go here and you find the same thing. Remember that the newest, biggest thing is what should appear first, not just in the story, but also in the sentence. Okay. You have to look at here and you have to look at the side, essentially like what's more important, the size of the crowd or the number of people arrested? Okay, that sort of thing. Okay. I don't necessarily weight one thing over the other, but there are certain I would say that there are certain aspects to some of these problems, for lack of a better term, that are more important than others. There's like one in particular where there's one element to this one particular story within these sets of leads that is so unique that it could not never have happened ever before or since. Okay. So yeah, others are a little more common. Like I would say, for instance, like this fire one right here does not have like the most unique elements to it. Okay. So I don't necessarily like make a big deal about this one, just as long as you basically report it. Names are usually put in the second paragraph of a story, not the first, because usually a lot of times they're a little bit harder for people to pronounce. The name of the person is usually, I hate to say it, is not the most important thing in a story. It's actually somebody getting hurt or something, okay, or the fire, that sort of thing. It can tend to bog down the lead. Not everybody knows the person. If it's somebody that everybody knows, a celebrity, then yeah, that's different. That's some, if you're a Knick fan, Jalen Brunson. So I'm a big Knick fan. I'm very happy right now. What's going on? Basketball. And you're going to want that in the lead, okay? If his house burned down. But if it's Kathy Mahoney, I'm sorry to Kathy, but it's not well-known person goes down more, okay? All right, so that's what we do with for this is that you actually write out the 12 leads and you put them and you send them into here. Here's another important thing too, okay, is that a lot of people confuse leads with headlines. We don't write headlines in this class. So what do I mean by that? Okay. Well, here's actually a story I was going to show you that actually is a pretty good story. This is interesting because I feel like this is crap, and I don't know. Maybe by the time I post this, I'll be wrong, and maybe that'll probably be a good thing if I'm wrong. But nearing the end war and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. I don't know. I just feel like there's been so much like misleading reporting, that sort of thing. But you'll see, this is an actual headline. We don't write headlines in this class. We write the actual story. This is what we write. We write leads like this. Okay. Here's the difference. A headline is written in a way that's headlineese. Okay. That's actually a term they call it. It's actually a whole different writing craft. And it's not written usually by the reporter themselves. It's written by the editor. Okay. It's a title to a story. Okay. Like a book title. A book title doesn't really even have any verbs or anything like that. It's written in a very short, catchy way. Okay. So U.S. Iran nearing deal. So it's written in almost like sort of present tense usually to show some sort of action or that sort of thing to end war and reopen Strait of Hormuz. So basically, it's lacking words. It's basically trying to say things as short as possible, so that basically you can get like news as quickly as possible and help you determine whether you want to keep reading or not. A lead is a full sentence. Okay, what that is was not really a full sentence. Nearing it does it probably it's an incomplete verb. It would need an is, okay, to have a complete verb. This is a complete sentence, okay? The United States and Iran have reached a tentative agreement to end their months-long war in Middle East. Senior officials on both sides said, but it comes with a major caveat, I'll say, that President Donald Trump and his counterparts in Tehran, Iran, are reviewing it. Okay, so that's a full sentence. Noun, the United States and Iran have reached verb, and then essentially direct object. Okay, a lot of times an additional clause can kind of bog down a story, but this is an important additional clause because been happening like so often is we've seen these tentative agreements coming, and then but this happens, especially this part right here. Iran has like rejected just about every like tentative agreement there's been. Maybe I'll be wrong by the time you'll see this. So anyway, and then it goes into some of the details going back into what I say. See there's other space in between these paragraphs. So once the lead is done, then it goes into the more granular details to help back up the lead. Senior U.S. officials acknowledge the framework deal following night, how it happened, that sort of thing. The one thing though is it doesn't really go so much into the details because that's really like kind of hazy right now. Okay. Um, it just basically talks about how this came about. So since it's lacking details, that's not really the most important thing right now. Okay. All right. So anyway, going back to what I was saying, that's actually the next thing that's due. Okay. So that's what you got to do. Okay. Um, and again, needs to be lit up tomorrow. But again, this is what's due on the Friday is the rewrite of the profile of somebody you know. The worksheets I just showed you, you have to download, but then write the answers in a Microsoft Word doc. That's also due on Friday. And then on Thursday is the ideas for next assignment. That's also a way I determine class participation. If you don't actually submit these ideas, that's going to be hurt your class participation grade. Okay. All right. I like the let's go. So let's go now into some of the reading now. Okay. Some of the heaviest reading of this is in the first week. Okay. The first couple of chapters actually have you guys read. I have you read chapters 3 and 4, kind of more general, like introduction into the world of journalism. Journalism is nonfiction storytelling to a large audience with varied interests, education levels, ethnicities, ages, genders, and more other demographics. With their good news judgment and audience in mind, journalists identify immediately the importance of a story and its supporting elements. They then communicate how the event is significant to an individual. Okay. So yeah, so basically it's very broad, but very much to the point, very much just kind of the one single mission is to inform you, okay? Not basically, it's not always going to excite you. It's not always going to knock you off your feet, but it's going to give you information you need to know. Like, am I paying more in taxes this year? Okay. Is the Iran war over? Okay. So as you can see here, a third robbery this month at the University apartments in Washington Street has tenants worry about their safety and building security. See, very much to the point. And then it goes into a little bit about like what happened to cause this feeling. Okay. Some of the same things I've talked about already. It's all about kind of simplifying words, sentences, basically trying to keep sentences, as you can see here, like this is actually something that would appear in a textbook. We see, and we're actually reading a textbook, but something that, again, maybe in a chemistry book. The mayor said he was happy with the city council had passed a long-awaited resolution to introduce the town's public library to task to acts to more than to provide more public funding to expand the book collection to remodel blah 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 blah. Blah. You see, I'm almost like running out of breath. This is not how we write. That's not how people talk. Have you ever talked to somebody who talks like this? They ramble, right? And it's hard to listen to. So all that could be just said like this in two separate paragraphs, one where that's actually kind of quick and catches your attention. The mayor said he was happy the city council passed a resolution increasing the library tax, but it was not enough to do everything that was needed. So you're finding out very quickly that you're going to have more money taken out of your pocket, but at the same time, it's not going to do the job. So that's what a lead does. Okay. The increase to provide, and then the next paragraph is when we get into like if you care. A lot of times people, like I said, don't get past. I've said before, a lot of times people don't get past the lead. They just read the lead and then they're kind of cut out. Okay. What you want to do is that gives you the opportunity to cut out. Okay. So anyway, the increase to provide funds expand, if you want to like leave, you can, obviously you want people to read the whole story. Okay. There's no question about that. But this is written for people and with the mind that there's been many studies done that people don't read really past the first paragraph. I hate to tell you that, but it's true, you know? I mean, I was reading a lot of this stuff before, like it's written like Twitter posts, or tweets, or sorry, X posts or whatever the hell they're called now. You know, um, I was actually like doing the Iran thing before to see if things were actually really happening that to lead to this maybe ending of the war. Israeli officials are now privately urging the Trump administration to completely abandon Iran negotiations. Interesting. Assassinate Iran's lead negotiator. I can't pronounce the name, sorry, and immediately restart strikes targeting Iran's. Okay, so that's essentially like how we can find information. This actually has been I mean, this has been I'm not going to say whether this is a respectable news organization, but I knew they do know they actually have reported things that have actually like been correct. Okay. Um, so yeah. Um, all right. Anyway, oh my God, a nuclear bomb. Okay. Anyway, okay. Well, don't worry about that. That's not gonna happen. Okay. Anyway, so it's very much like along those lines in basically kind of like almost announcing the news, but not as quickly or as like deficiently as a headline would. A lead is a full sentence. Everybody got that? A full sentence. Okay. All right. Let's go back to the book. Okay, so yeah, so it's about simplification, keeping things as basically as basic as possible. Okay, getting rid of unnecessary words. Fatalities seem more common in that. I see a lot of this like in the actual assignment I just assigned to you guys, the leads worksheet assignment. Is I see people feel like they need to have some sort of introduction. Just get right to the news. Okay, if there's a protest, tell me how people are arrested because how many people are arrested is more unique than how many people are actually at the protest. There's plenty of protests, but get right to it. Don't feel like you need some introduction. I see people write things like, like a protest of major proportions was held outside. There's no need to introduce it. Get right to the story. Okay. All right. Moving right along. Okay. Obviously, I talked to you about accuracy, clarity, and focus. Those are the things that I look for. And that's basically focusing and keeping things specifically focused on like a one theme or one word that matters. Okay. Famous celebrity, famous is redundant. In fact, it's even opinionated. Okay. You don't need a thoughtful reply. It's just reply. Okay. You got to keep things simple, things unbiased. Of course, racism, as far as I'm concerned, there's no both sides to that, okay? Racism is racism and it's wrong and it's disgusting, okay? And it's pitiful. All right, so basically that has absolutely no place at all. I've actually had to deal with that on occasion over my 20 2 years of teaching. Okay. Gender and sexuality and sexism, same deal. I respect the fact that people choose to identify themselves the way they want to identify themselves. So, yes. So make sure that you also let me know that, uh, please, that you let me know what pronouns you use. That's important. Okay. Okay. So please, I probably always had this too. Please avoid this. Review exercises. There's no review exercises. Okay. Please ignore that. Strike it, get rid of it. Bleh. Okay. Hey man, when these lectures get long, I got to do something, right? The language of news, this is more about just trying to keep things simple. The effectiveness of words, the wine complemented the entree, the air commission, the president worried about the influx of, basically it's good to like use like strong adjectives. I kind of warn on this chapter a little bit because I mean, I don't want something that's kind of like totally off a cliff, but like, when the protesters actually stormed the Capitol in the U.S. On January 6th, 2021, they actually did do that. They stormed the Capitol, okay? They didn't just walk. So you want to make sure that you have verbs that accurately describe what the hell is going on, okay? Okay. So yeah, basically it goes into a little bit of like what ground. This is like some of the stuff in this that basically you probably dealt with like in English class, this sort of thing. Run-on sentences are bad. A lot of times when you go to if you find yourself going to a second clause in a sentence, ask yourself if that's really necessary. Periods are your friends, okay? Basically, if you don't like, if you have like a sentence just goes on and on like I showed you before, and you don't have any kind of break, you're gonna tire the reader and bore them to death, okay? Um, Usually it's contain usually if you're going on to a second clause, you got to ask yourself, is this really necessary? I felt like it was necessary in this story because this has been a huge caveat whether Trump or Iran are actually going to approve these deals because that's what's nixed it all along. But all these deals, and then all they've done is just fall apart. Okay. Um, but if they do actually end the war and then that would be the one sentence. The United States and Iran have agreed to end the war that's lasted since February, and that's it. Okay. If you go on and on about oil supplies and the Strait of Hormuz and blah blah, all in the same lead, that's a run-on sentence. Okay, that's something that can be covered a little bit later. Okay, just stick to the main thing, which is the war ended. Okay. Obviously, spelling is important. Keep making sure, especially names. Okay, if you actually misspell a name, you can actually get into trouble. Okay. I've known people who have actually misidentified murderers, okay, or accused murderers, I should say. Like, I hate to use this name, but it's a name like John Brown. Brown is spelled different ways. If you identify John Brown as an accused killer in a town and you don't ask how to spell Brown and it's spelled Browne, and you spell it Brown because you think everybody's last name is spelled Brown, there's a person who's in town named John Brown who they might think is the murderer. And people have been sued because of that. So you gotta make sure everything's spelled correctly. Use your spell check. Don't be sloppy. Make sure that when you actually quote somebody, that you get their name correct. Oh my God, it could be like really a bad thing, really terrible thing. Diction, just really making sure that everything you write is clear and concise. My God, we talked about strong verbs. We talked about adjectives really just kind of stay away from. Not necessary. Ew, ick, ick. All right, the body of a news story. Okay, we've talked about this one a little bit already. Okay, so yeah, okay, don't be so confused by that because I know I said it's not so much like it is like in an essay where there's a hypothesis and a body and blah blah blah. There's a body in every kind of story and that sort of thing. But when you write a news story, it's almost like the whole thing is the body, okay? So it's like really from start to finish, you're basically describing everything you need to know. So basically, like after what follows the lead is the body, and that body is the who, the what, the where the why and what backs up the lead, okay, and provides those granular details that I talked about, okay. I've talked about the inverted pyramid and why that's important. I don't want to really, some of this stuff, I mean, I would, the hourglass, there's not really an hourglass style. There's not really a focus style. It's all about, sometimes I would say that it's not an exact inverted pyramid because sometimes the details in a story are almost equal importance. When you do actually often when you do a profile story, um, the details are actually usually equally important from top to bottom. So it's not so much of a triangle, it's more of a square, so a rectangle. Narrative style, I actually don't get so much into that just yet. That's actually something I deal with a little bit later. Um, Obviously, the use of transitions is important. And we'll be getting into that, but essentially, like, you know, this is another way I also describe. So I showed you the inverted pyramid. When you get inside the inverted pyramid, you actually typically have a lead, okay? And then you have a transition. That's basically identifies the first point of the story that backs up the lead, okay? And then if you have like a crime story or something like that, where it's fact after fact after fact after fact, it's just transition. And transition meaning just basically bring up a new point that backs up the lead, bring up another new point that backs up the lead, and it goes on and on. Okay? Sometimes you get a little more detail than that, though. Sometimes you may get a little more detail. It's called an anecdote, which is an anecdote is something that basically is a little story within a story that backs up the points you're making, helps illuminate. And they come usually after transitions. Okay? All right. And then you might have like a quote that comes in, a direct quote. I'm not a fan of long, direct quotes, by the way. You should know this, okay? Quotes are almost unnecessary to a story. They help provide humanization to a story, but your most important part is the lead, the transition. If it's a longer, more in-depth story than an anecdote, that's something where we're basically like, let's say you have a story about a person and it's about me, Tom Davis. It's about me, like essentially, like, and you write about how like I've been writing about mental health, blah, 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 for a long, long time. And then the anecdote would be maybe a story within a story that eliminates the larger theme. And maybe say like, for example, one day I wrote, or Tom Davis wrote a book called Legacy of Madness. It'd be like an anecdote talking about that book. That's like a specific example that backs up the overall theme. Okay. We'll be getting more into that as we get into the, and then it goes back to a transition, another transition. But a quote is something that's usually like a direct quote, something that has quotations around it that basically helps illuminate the larger story and helps humanize it. Those are things that are usually better taught when I actually grade your stories. So I don't really want to bog you down too much on that. Okay. Need to be fair, obviously, trying to get really like both sides to a story, like trying to get as much depth as possible. Okay. Interviewing. Okay. So interviewing is the last chapter I'm asking you guys to read. Interviewing, I mean, I get to ask that question a lot. Interviewing is not supposed to be necessarily the smoothest operation in the world. They talk about this whole thing. This book's a little dated. Presidents sit down with like people all the time. But basically, it's all the same no matter who the person is that you're interviewing. Asking questions, getting answers, asking more questions is a basic tool for a journalist. For the investigative reporter is basically the way to dig and get information, getting background, and that sort of thing. Okay. Um, but anyway, so it's actually good to prepare for an interview. Sometimes, like when you're working with a breaking news story, you don't have that kind of you know time to do that. But trying to get the facts and the basic details is very important. Obviously, it's good to maybe even like write down your questions ahead of time. And I have to tell you, it can be an awkward process. I like to say that, again, using this macro to micro thing that I talk about, it's good to start with very general questions. I talked a little bit about this in the last tape, but start with very general questions, very broad, summarizing questions, okay? Just basically like who you are and what are you about. And it could be very awkward and kind of like that. You do want to get to maybe some point where maybe like you feel more comfortable with your subject. So you basically kind of like let them feel at ease, let them feel it's good to a lot of times I would recommend I mean, I know a lot of people don't use notebooks anymore. They just type on their computers when they interview, okay? But I would say that it's actually good to kind of just have a conversation with somebody first and maybe just kind of memorize like some important things about them and then just start like typing and that sort of thing. And really like try to get an idea of like what they're talking about first, okay? And actually I have a term for that too. It's good that actually when you go through the actual interviewing process to really kind of listen first and understand what's going on And then you'll have a better understanding of, and I'll be able to ask better questions. So then you internalize, okay? And then you actually like take notes. And when you take notes, you don't write down everything that's being said, okay? You basically write down, you summarize like you would do in class, like in any other class that you're taking, like whether it's English or whatever, you would summarize the things that are being said. Listen, internalize, and then you write down, and then you summarize what's being said, okay? And that basically, by internalizing and summarizing, you're actually learning as you're writing. And then maybe you even have an idea as you're actually like taking those notes of what the story is going to be about. Okay. You might even be writing the story in your head. If you write down everything that's being said, that's called rote memorization. And basically, what happens is you're not listening or not internalizing. Okay. So don't write down everything that's being said. Only write down something exact when you hear a good, let's say, a good, colorful quote that's being said. Okay. Like, I hit that baseball way out of the park so far that it went into yesterday, or you went to tomorrow, or something like that. Something colorful or something like that. That's something maybe you write down every word for. But you got to listen and internalize and then write and then summarize. Okay. All right. And then, but like I said, it's good to prepare. Even, maybe you like try to educate yourself on the person or the subject. Maybe that person's been written about before. Maybe there's stuff on the internet about that person. Okay. Stuff like the chronology of events, relationships involving people, context. It's also good to get background, but try to keep the story up to date, okay? As much as possible, okay? If there's something like you're doing these stories about people, make sure that like, you keep it up to date as possible. I might have said this already, but I'll just repeat it. If I've had people write about stories about people like going through car accidents and that sort of thing, but the story isn't so much about if it happened like 5 years ago, that's not the main theme of the story. Because what happened since then? Is the person alive? Okay, is the person like hurt? It's even better story if you're writing about it now and they've actually overcome what they've done in the last 5 years and actually have overcome and succeeded. It's an inspirational story. So you don't write about the car accident itself that happened 5 years ago. You write about what's happening now. News is about what's new. So you write about what's new and what's happening now and basically what they did to keep going in their lives. That's the most important thing. What's happening now and how they overcame it. Okay? Obviously trying to find a location that's like easy on the person is important, that sort of thing. Okay. All right. I just want to make sure that I got everything here that I want to talk about. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. You can also remember that if you have any kind of like problem or issue or what's going on, you could schedule office hours with me. I always do these I do it through Zoom. Okay. That sort of thing. Actually, I'm sorry. I meant to go to something else here that I just kind of keep notes to myself. Okay. Yes, one sentence leads. You keep things also, that's another important thing also right here. These are notes that I keep to myself. Keep things in the third person voice. That's he, she, it. Do no personal pronouns like me, I. Okay. That's also a way of staying objective. When you write about yourself, you have to be persuasive too. When you get into commentary or that sort of thing, you have to add on to the accuracy and clarity and focus, like a level of persuasiveness that convinces people. A lot of people do not like reading stories where it says they say I in them. Okay, it's much better to be, and it's much more objective to be the fly on the wall and see things from outside, like those they say 10,000 feet above. Okay. Okay, so I think we're actually good here. Anyway, all right, everybody. Look, that's it. Let me know if you have any kind of issues. You know what to do now. So, anyway, there's a little bit of like a crap up here. All right, and reach out to me if you have any kind of issues. Thanks very much, and I'll talk to you.